So what does the loss in Montreal in particular signal for the Trudeau government moving forward? Soraya Martinez Ferrada is the Minister of Tourism, and she also is the Liberals' national campaign co-chair. I spoke to her a bit earlier. Hi, Minister. Pleasure to welcome you here in studio. I think for the first time. Thanks very much for making the time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And I appreciate you talking on, I know what's probably not the easiest of days for your party. I want to start off quite bluntly and ask you, if your party can't win in Toronto or in Montreal, where can you win?
Well, I think the important thing for us is, yes, by-elections are important, absolutely, and we all want to win. We always said this was going to be a tight race, and going forward, there are going to be tight race. So every vote counts, every riding counts, and now we're just looking forward to, starting planning and campaigning for the general election, which is the one that people are looking for, because that's where people elect their government, and that's why we're aiming for that next step.
And I certainly take your point about tight races, and I think if this were a conversation, let's say, in certain parts of the GTA or certain parts of British Columbia, but this is in Toronto and now in Montreal. These are ridings that you previously won by more than 20 points in the last federal general election, as you point out. This is a massive reduction in not only the margin, but you actually lost. If you can't win there, where can you win? What do you tell your candidates?
We just have to remember that a by-election is less than 40% of participation. That's a huge, that's a number we have to reflect on. So not everybody's going out to vote on that day. That's one thing. The other thing is that for us is very important. And we're taking lessons. We're looking at what happened in St. Paul's. We're looking at what happened yesterday. And for us, one thing that we're looking into is that we have to better communicate to our electors and Quebecers around, if you vote here for the Bloc, you're actually helping the Conservatives to get elected. And Quebecers do not want a Conservative government in Ottawa. So we need to make sure that we're communicating that. And again, the tight race we had last night, when you look at the numbers during the night, we moved from first, second, third, everybody moved. And honestly, every party had everything on the ground, and it could have went anyway.
But ultimately it didn't go your way. And again, you were reduced from a 20-point margin in which you won in a riding that in one iteration for 2 decades held a former Liberal Prime Minister to what resulted last night. You talk about lessons, with all due respect, Minister, learned from Toronto. What changed at all between then and now? Because I think the electorate is telling you nothing did.
Well, actually, again, we have to be careful when you use numbers. When you talk to me about a stronghold, that's a media spin, and that's a media spin around a general election. We're talking about a by-election, where not even 40% of people are participating in. And the other thing is,
so you think a riding held, just for a second, you think a riding held for 2 decades by Paul Martin being called a Liberal stronghold is media spin. You've only lost that riding or an iteration of it twice, in the 2011 NDP Orange Wave and the 1984 Brian Mulroney sweep. That's a fact that it's a Liberal stronghold.
But campaigns change. Demographics change. Parties change. Now we're in a tight race. We're in a 3-way race. And I think that's going to be the norm even in general election. And for us to be able to make sure that we're understanding how that election went, because the next time around, those tight races will happen again. And we have to make sure that we're ready for that in the general election.
So I take that point. So let's say you come away with that lesson from the Toronto by-election. What did you amend or ameliorate in order to address that situation in this by-election? Because it seems like all we heard from you and your ministerial colleagues in the interim was, we're going to keep on working for Canadians and keep on delivering. There were no changes.
But there's 2 things. Governing for Canadians and delivering on what we said we were going to deliver, it's one thing. The party, when you need to campaign, it's another thing. Campaigns are important.
But you're campaigning on what you're governing on.
Yes, but a by-election, citizens want to send you a message in a by-election. They always do. It's always been like that. We can give you so many examples of by-elections that we have lost, and that other governments have lost, and when general elections. Campaign matters. And I think we need to make sure that we're ready for the general election. But one thing that, for me, is very important and different going forward. People don't have phone lines anymore. Campaign at the doors, it's different. It takes more time, it takes more people. One thing that we saw in this election that I can be very proud of is that our party is healthy. I had almost 500 volunteers from Liberal Party on the ground campaigning in a by-election.
You also had staffers send you a letter saying they refused to because of your government's stance on Gaza.
Yes, but
publicly say that.
Because the Liberal Party is the reflect of what society is right now. And people are suffering on both sides of the spectrum of what's happening in Gaza. We never said that this was not easy. And staffers that talked about that, they actually feel that they can do that. And the Liberal Party has never been a one side and slogans that conservatives can just use and hide behind those.
Right, but you're talking about the general health of your party.
Yes.
And I'm saying that they didn't feel like they could espouse these views and then also continue to support your party. They actually felt they couldn't continue supporting your party and said so in a public letter.
There was maybe, 52 people that said that. I had about 500 volunteers, which a lot of new people, even people from the Muslim community, even people that, because at the end of the day, we want the same thing. We want a ceasefire, we want peace, we want a two-state solution. We get that. People are suffering right now on that spectrum of what's happening in the Middle East. But right now, in this by-election, we have to make sure that we are taking a lot of things from this by-election and preparing, because it was a good dry run for us in terms of how do we prepare for a general election, making sure that
so this by-election was just a dry run?
It's not just a dry run, but it is a way for us to learn, to make sure that we are ready for the general election, that we'll elect a government that a lot of people in Quebec don't want to be a conservative government.
And I know your time is limited, so
yes.
I just want to, with respect, push back on the idea that there are lessons learned. I still don't understand what lessons were incorporated from Toronto that you presented to people in Montreal or people who were voting in this by-election. And today when the Prime Minister said, we need people to understand what's at stake in this election,
yes.
it felt like from a lot of people who wrote me on CJAD in Montreal, where my radio show airs during the middle of the day, from their perspective, like the Prime Minister was blaming voters almost for getting it wrong. Why would you send that message today?
Well, I don't think that was the intent. I think the intent is saying, no, we hear you. In Quebec, we hear that a lot of people do not want a conservative government that will cut the support that we have put in place. Childcare.
That's what you heard. You didn't hear that they don't want a liberal government.
What I've heard in the doors, the first thing that I hear is that we do not want the conservatives. Now, we need to show the Quebecers and the electorate that we are the alternative to that conservative government. And now that's on us to do that. And again,
does it say something that over 9 years you have not been able to deliver that message to Quebecers?
I mean, governments, when we've been there for a long time, I get it, could be unfair. And sometimes it could be unfair. We've delivered for Canadians on a lot of things, on childcare, on food programs, on family benefits, on housing. And yes, it could be unfair. Now people are suffering. Economy is going well, but a lot of people, most of the people don't feel it. And we have to make sure that every Canadian feels that they are supported when the economy is doing right. And we do have to make sure that we're taking the time to do that. And I see it. It's not an easy task, but at the end of the day, it's where people want to live as a country, and making sure that Canada keeps its values, keeps its democracy, keeps its right information, and people feeling safe and not being governed by a government that only speaks on slogan on very complex issue. And that's very hard to explain, but we have to take the time to do that. And that's what we're doing door to door.
Okay, Minister, I'll leave it on that note. I appreciate you making the time,
so much.
as always, very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much.